sounds strange how the low frequency from the power station.
Yeah.
It's coming through, right?
Yeah,
it's very powerful.
It's maybe the ground.
And even the water, no? It might be carry the water, might be carrying also the sound?
Yeah, the sound can go very far in water, so it could be just in the water. It's maybe not the ground. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can sound inspire us to think differently? We'll take you to places you'd probably never go. Remote, unfamiliar, not very appealing places, yet ones that are exciting and reveal much about the future challenges posed to our society. Ones that are rich in sound. Future Landscapes, a podcast on the challenges of humankind as heard in sound. In previous episodes, our sonic journey zeroed in on the potential of land that is free from agricultural production, the underground storage of CO2, or the impact of infrastructures related to electricity production. And this is something we'll explore further in this episode as we visit Iceland's newest hydroelectric power plant, situated on the Throrarensen River, along with 5 other plants. Though seen as a greener option, unsuspected global implications lie hidden under the calm surface of the Búðarháls Dam. Local field recordist Magnús Bergsson, who has spent decades recording the sounds of places where biological diversity is changing due to human activity, is a great guide for other members of the expedition, which includes philosopher of technology Lukáš Likavčan, musicians Václav Havelka, and Throrarensen. Between Two Worlds, Episode 5, Búðarháls Hydropower Dam, Iceland. Much of Iceland's landscape is defined by ancient lava fields, where only moss can grow. As we drive away from the main population centers, the absence of trees and other life becomes apparent, and the view is defined by miles and miles of these rocky plains. That's why we're taken aback by the landscaping activities that begin to appear along the road as we move along the country's longest river further into the island's interior. There's a lot of construction work going on throughout the area to tame the river and make it flow according to human economic needs. Heavy machinery is digging long canals that scarify the landscape in strictly geometric patterns that appear to be the only visible rule. The existence of the Búðarháls hydropower dam is also heralded by a miles-long system of massive, high-voltage pylons connected by wires. We stop by one of them to listen to the sound of the dam's main product, electricity. Once Magnús connects his geophone to the construction, a massive, awe-inspiring soundscape comes through, reminiscent of the nave of a cathedral. It's as if the substance that causes it were holy.
sound gives us an understanding on infrastructure as not just being an object, but also the effect. It's not just something that accompanies the material existence of infrastructure, but that it's something that belongs to the essence of the infrastructure, the pervasiveness of the effect.
We don't encounter any obstacle while accessing the dam's austere-looking complex of concrete buildings wedged into the lake's shoreline. There is no fence preventing unauthorized visitors, and no warning sign. It is truly a public site, which corresponds with the fact that it is indeed a publicly funded facility run by a state-owned company. There's no one around. A roof camera is the only sign that the place is being monitored remotely from Reykjavik, where the dam's operation is also controlled. In the vicinity of the structure that houses turbines and a transformer that turns the water flow into electricity, Magnús attaches his mics to the ground, and the processes that take place inside the facility become audible. All the vibrations emitted during the process are transformed in our headphones into a surprisingly rich soundscape.
The more I think about that, the more it seems to me that what we're doing here is also something that we can call cognitive mapping, in that kind of sense that we try to find ways how to digest the complexity.
Hydropower is a renewable source of energy, and here in Iceland, it is also the predominant method of generating electricity. In fact, 3/4 of Icelandic energy come from hydroelectric plants similar to this one, which has earned the country a reputation for being environmentally conscious. The reason we decided to subject this particular dam to our sonic scrutiny is the unexpected ambivalence connected to this engineering project. Even if its operation does not generate CO2 emissions or poison air and water, the very reason for its creation is problematic. The plant was built to power the Straumsvík aluminum plant, located on the Reykjanes Peninsula, not far from the capital of Reykjavik. This giant US-owned plant is the very opposite of environmental sensitivity. The amount of toxic waste and CO2 emissions it produces is enormous.
There's this prominent concept of extractivism coming to mind, especially in relation to fossil fuels. And so at first glance it seems kind of weird to associate this concept with hydro power plant as this one. I mean, despite Iceland is known as the paradise of renewables, it's also land that to some extent sends the problem of extractivism one step down the line, as this hydropower plant powers mainly the aluminium smelter. Aluminium smelting and associated processes actually account for almost 50% of all the CO2 emissions of this little country of Iceland. That means that in the end, the problem with emitting CO2 is not completely solved. It's just dislocated somewhere else to the place which is less obvious as a major source of CO2 emissions. To me, like, this link with extractivism also links to how we think about engineering and civic engineering as usually being about reshaping large landscapes for some kind of public good. And obviously this doesn't, in this case, hold, because it's very questionable whether there's any public good coming out of this project of landscaping.
At first glance, the Búðarháls Dam is rather small, and its water surface area is 7 square kilometers. However, it is a part of an entire cascade of dams on the Throrarensen River that are connected together in one network. During the years of their construction, these dams were the subject of broad public criticism and sparked protests and even clashes with the police. This is partly because they greatly contribute to the destabilization of ecosystems and create large blank areas in the diverse map of living organisms. But people were also protesting against the purpose of these dams, which is to power a dirty industry.
I wonder to what extent we should actually think more about how these technologies should be associated with shifts in ethos, ethics and politics of engineering. We should think about engineering in terms of less centralizing and more decentralizing perhaps efforts. As maybe this small hydropower plant would be an example of if it didn't power the aluminium smelter, because compared to the largest hydropower plant in Iceland, this is a completely different scale, it's way smaller. There are stories of these like large dams in Iceland causing massive environmental harm, almost like depleting all the underground water resources and causing or starting desertification processes in some parts of Iceland. That means that operating at smaller scales with the hydropower plants as this one may be the way forward, but it doesn't remove the fact that the power which is produced here is still used for a heavily environmentally damaging industry.
There's one more industry significantly linked to local energy production, and that's data storage. If you use any cloud services for storing documents or videos, your data are probably housed in one of Iceland's data centers. You can picture them as gigantic halls housing networked computer systems and related infrastructure. In other words, it's an industrial-scale operation using as much electricity as a small town. You may wonder how this is connected to a remote island country or its hydropower dams. Well, this is because Iceland has been trying to attract cloud providers to run their infrastructure here, using very low electricity prices as an incentive.
There's this link between extractivism and engineering, a possibility to reshape engineering after extractivism differently. What's another industry that flourishes because of the cheap renewable energy here in Iceland is also computation. Large computation, almost planetary scale computation processes, cloud archiving, etc. It seems that it links computation to geology in a way that is kind of poetic and lyrical in one way. The country behaves almost like an energy startup. I think that Iceland will actually benefit from the damage caused in other parts of the world in the future. And it will benefit in the way how the climate change may actually bring a different environmental conditions here, which may be, for example, more beneficial for agriculture or maybe urbanization and moving population to the north from the countries which will be less habitable in the future.
Though Iceland's climate may not be the best for sunbathing, local politicians have realized that it is favorable for the data industry. Companies save a lot of money on cooling their facilities by running their operations here, as Iceland's annual average temperature is only 5 degrees Celsius. Even in the midst of the climate crisis, new opportunities of habitability and enterprise can emerge. What now is a fertile soil for data can later produce other crops.
One more thing I find really interesting about this Icelandic strategy is also the geopolitical part. It is outside of any kind of like power concerns, in a sense like it is not a disputed territory, it is not something that would international community really focus on too much. In that sense, it seems to me like very attractive locations for people that want to hide some activity. or just have it not that visible. And I think Iceland provides also an opportunity for that in this sense, to actually have the most of the computation happening somewhere out of the sight, out of the reach of the eyes of the public.
It's quite interesting, like there's like no animals. I mean, you can see some sheep.
Yeah.
Only few birds.
Yeah, a few birds.
You maybe can see foxes here.
So quiet.
Yes, it's otherwise very, very quiet.
I also wonder how much of the public attention was given to consequences not to human lives, but to the non-human lives. In the future, when we will be thinking about large-scale landscaping operations, should ask always, like, so what's the damage caused to like all the non-human communities, in the same way we are accustomed to ask about the consequences on the human populations.
From a certain perspective, it suits the island country to be separated from Europe by sea, as it can to a certain degree develop its economy out of sight and act as an autonomous unit. In this context, when we listen to the turbines of the dam, we can actually hear the sound of economic competition between the states that want to lure in corporate investors that bring money and jobs. No matter how interconnected the world is, competition prevails over cooperation and a rational distribution of resources.
One more thing that really shocks me is what economic narratives are used to justify these projects. Talking about Iceland as a potential net exporter of energy or net exporter of information, it's like an old-fashioned economic language that looks at, states as individual units that provide stuff to each other in this way, yeah. In the way in which this extractive logic unfolds, that okay, you have an energy, then you have an aluminium industry, and you generate what out of that? Just a profit, a capital. The only way how you can imagine the economy is as an ensemble organized for the profit extraction.
Sound can echo the deeper impacts that electricity production has on the landscape. Magnús's hydrophone, now plunged below the surface of the water, yields an unexpected discovery. It's one of the key moments when sound reveals much more than what is visible to the eye. Now, listen carefully. What you've heard are methane bubbles as they are being released from organisms rotting in the water. This is what dams do after nature is splashed with stable water. Even though it's invisible to the eye and not audible to the human ear, this process is dangerous. As in the first 20 years after the emission, methane warms the atmosphere 80 times faster than CO2. This small dam produces half a ton of methane per day. All the dams in the world combined account for 1% of all emitted methane.
I was very surprised, but also glad to experience the sound of the methane bubbles, since we know that it's a greenhouse gas which is even more efficient in producing the greenhouse effect than CO2, and it's completely hidden kind of danger to the human eyes. So in that sense, evidence we can get through such an auditory experience gives a kind of hope that we can, share this kind of evidence and also provide, a sufficient means of actually making it more mainstream to understand this accompanying dangers which are not evident when we say hydropower plant or when we say greenhouse gas.
It's really changing the whole environment, like deeply, and you can hear it through the sound, how it goes like very far, even through the ground, into the water, and how the water resonates.
Let's take a moment to focus on the little details our microphones capture when attached to the dam railings, all the vibrations and oscillations. They can be perceived as unimportant and inconclusive, useless in terms of the information they convey. But if we allow ourselves to understand them as an amplification of the processes in the background, they have much to reveal.
Every structure, every fence, piece of metal can be such a perceptual mirror of the universe. It can hide information of such a high density and granularity. From one piece of metal you can infer back what is happening in a wider surrounding. And that's again something that subverts our visual experience in a very productive fashion, because it subverts the rigidity of the way how we usually see the landscape as a conglomeration of discrete objects. And of course, smooth, minimalist, functionalist design can hide all the imperfections. The moment we hear what is behind this design, that's the moment when we realize it's just a camouflage. It's just an aesthetic interface that reveals in the same way as it hides important information about the process happening inside. That's the critical quality of sound.
You've just heard the 5th episode of Future Landscapes, a podcast on the challenges of humankind based on a sonic expedition into the ambivalent technologies and ecosystems of the Czech Republic and Iceland. You can find much more, including information on the equipment used by Magnús and Sara, at futurelandscapes.cz. Stay tuned to this podcast for more sonic journeys.